My daughter-in-law slapped me in front of her whole family on Christmas night. I wasn't even invited, but I went because I thought I was part of the family. My son just stood there, watching, while everyone laughed. And when I walked out, he ran after me saying it was just a prank. But no prank should ever feel like betrayal. Please give it a like, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments where you're hearing my story of revenge. I want to know how far it's gone. That night, the snow was thick on the ground, sparkling under the porch lights. I remember holding a gift bag in one hand, cookies I'd baked myself, and a red scarf in the other. I'd spent hours knitting it for my son, Daniel. It was the first Christmas without his father, and I thought maybe this year we'd try to feel like a family again. But when I walked through that door, all I felt was cold. The room went silent when I entered. His wife, Lindsay, was standing near the fireplace in her shiny green dress. Her mother's smile froze mid-sip. Her brother chuckled under his breath. I heard someone whisper, "She actually came." Lindsay turned around slowly, a fake grin spreading across her face. "Oh, wow," she said, voice dripping with sarcasm. "Didn't think you'd show up, Carol." No mom, no warmth, just my first name. I tried to keep it light. Of course I'd show up. It's Christmas. Family doesn't need an invitation. She laughed. A few others joined in. "Well, maybe next time you should wait for one," she said, stepping closer. "Some people can't take a hint." Before I could reply, she slapped me. The sound cracked across the room. My face burned. The music stopped. And the worst part wasn't the pain. It was Daniel, standing there, holding his glass, frozen like a statue. No shock, no anger, just blankness. Her family burst into laughter like it was part of a show. One of them even clapped. I could taste humiliation in my mouth. Bitter, dry, heavy. I put the bag down on the counter. "Merry Christmas," I said quietly, then turned to leave. As I stepped out into the cold, the laughter from inside followed me. My boots sunk into the snow. Every step away from that house felt like tearing off a piece of myself. I'd paid the down payment for that house. I'd covered their mortgage for 2 years when Daniel lost his job. And now, I wasn't even welcome under its roof. Halfway down the driveway, I heard the door open behind me. Daniel's voice called out, "Mom, wait, please." He caught up, out of breath, his face red from embarrassment, or maybe guilt. "It was a prank," he said quickly. "We were just messing around. Don't take it seriously, okay? Lindsay didn't mean it." I looked him straight in the eye. "A prank?" My voice came out low, steady. "You let your wife slap your mother as a prank." He rubbed the back of his neck. "It was just for laughs, Mom. Everyone's drinking, having fun. You know how she is." I stared at him for a long moment, the snow still falling between us. Then I smiled, slowly, coldly. I said, "You're right. I do know how she is. And now, I know how you are, too." When I turned away, I saw his expression falter, like he suddenly realized what I meant. But it was too late. I drove home with my hands shaking on the steering wheel. Not from sadness. No, that had burned out hours ago. But from something sharper. The kind of rage that feels quiet, measured, dangerous. The kind that doesn't scream. It plans. That night, I sat in my kitchen with a cup of black coffee and stared at the papers spread across my table. The mortgage statements, the loan documents, the joint account records. I had helped Daniel get that house. Without me, he'd still be in that tiny apartment, barely affording rent. I thought I was helping my son build a life. Turns out, I was just funding my own disrespect. I stayed up until sunrise reading every paper twice, making mental notes. I wasn't sure yet what I'd do, but I knew one thing for certain. By next Christmas, they'd understand what real payback feels like. The next morning, my phone buzzed nonstop. Messages from Daniel, voicemails, even a text from Lindsay saying, "Sorry if we went too far, LOL." I didn't reply to any of them. I just watched the snow melt outside my window, thinking about all the years I'd spent sacrificing for a son who couldn't even lift a finger when his wife humiliated me. You ever look back at your life and realize all your kindness was wasted on the wrong people? That was me, right then. And the more I thought about it, the more I knew this wasn't going to end with silence. The next few days after Christmas were quiet. Too quiet. The kind of silence that fills every room and makes your own heartbeat sound loud. I didn't leave the house, didn't answer calls. I just replayed that night again and again. Her laugh, his silence, my humiliation.
By New Year's Eve, Daniel showed up at my door. He looked exhausted, dark circles under his eyes, wearing that same old leather jacket I bought him 3 birthdays ago. "Mom," he said softly, "can we talk?" I let him in, not because I wanted to, but because I wanted to hear how far he'd go to defend what they did. He sat on the couch, fidgeting with his hands. "Lindsay's sorry," he said quickly. "She didn't mean to disrespect you like that. She's been under stress. The holidays, her family visiting, you know how she gets." I cut him off. "No, Daniel, I don't know how she gets, but I do know how you get. Weak." His face tightened. "Mom, no! You let her hit me in front of everyone, and you didn't say a word. Then you called it a prank?" I leaned forward. "That's not stress. That's cruelty. And you're an accomplice." He sighed. "You're blowing this out of proportion." That was the moment I knew he didn't get it. Maybe he never would. I stood up. "You should go. Tell Lindsay I said thank you. She gave me a gift that night. Clarity." He frowned. "Clarity? Yes. The kind that comes when a mother finally sees what her son has become." He left angry, slammed the door. I didn't flinch. I just smiled. Because while he was talking, I'd noticed something in his coat pocket. A letter from the bank. Mortgage payment overdue. 2 months behind. I knew that house inside out. The payments, the refinance schedule, the insurance. I'd been handling most of it when he was struggling with work. And even though I had stopped paying the mortgage last summer, I'd left a safety fund in the joint account so they'd stay afloat. Guess what? That fund was still under my name. So the next morning, I went to the bank. The same woman who helped me set up the account years ago smiled when she saw me. "Mrs. Brooks," she said, "how are you?" "I'm fine," I said calmly. "I just need to make a few changes to the mortgage assistance account for my son, Daniel Brooks." She typed on her keyboard, nodded, and printed some forms. I signed everything without hesitation. Within 10 minutes, the financial cord that tied me to Daniel and Lindsay was gone. Every automatic payment canceled. Every linked credit support removed. I walked out lighter, freer. By mid-January, Daniel called, then texted, then called again. The bank must have informed him. "Mom, what's going on? The bank says your name isn't on the payment system anymore." I texted back one line. "You're married now. Let your wife handle it." He didn't reply. Weeks passed. The silence between us became a wall. Then, one evening in February, a friend of mine from the same neighborhood called. "Carol," she said, "I saw Daniel and Lindsay's house listed on a local notice board. Looks like foreclosure warnings are up." I said nothing, just thanked her and hung up. My coffee tasted better that night than it had in months. By spring, I heard from mutual friends that they were drowning in bills. Lindsay's expensive tastes didn't help. Designer clothes, parties, Instagram perfect dinners. I knew her type. She married Daniel because she thought I'd always be there to clean up their mess. But I wasn't cleaning anymore. And as much as I enjoyed watching them struggle, I wasn't done yet.
No, I wanted her to feel what I'd felt: humiliation, exposure, that sting of shame that burns deeper than any slap. One afternoon in April, I walked into Lindsay's boutique, the one she ran with her friend Amber. It was a small store on Main Street, all glass doors and fake smiles. She froze when she saw me. "Carol?" she said quickly, trying to sound polite. "Hi, what are you doing here?" I smiled. "Just looking, supporting local business, you know?" Her smile wavered. "That's nice of you." I picked up a dress, looked at the tag, and raised an eyebrow. $480 for polyester? Impressive markup. Amber shifted awkwardly. Lindsay crossed her arms. "If you're here to cause trouble..." I cut her off. "Oh, sweetheart, I don't cause trouble. I let trouble find people who deserve it." Then I leaned in closer, lowered my voice. "I heard about the mortgage. Tough times, huh? But maybe Daniel can ask for another loan. Or maybe he can ask his mother again." Her cheeks went red. "Stay out of our business." "Oh, I intend to," I said, turning toward the door. "Just thought I'd let you know I'm out of the business of paying for ungrateful people." The way her face fell was the first small victory I allowed myself to enjoy. But it was only the beginning, because that summer I learned something that changed everything. A friend of mine who worked at a catering company mentioned offhand that Lindsay's family was planning a big anniversary party for her parents. And guess who was footing most of the bill? Daniel. My son, who could barely make his mortgage payments, was throwing an event for the same people who laughed while their daughter slapped me. That's when my plan really began. What would you have done in my shoes? Stayed silent? Walked away? Or would you do what I did? Turn their perfect party into the beginning of their downfall? I watched them plan that anniversary like a hawk.
Margaret and Harold, Lindsay's parents, had rented the old barn at Willow Creek, the kind of place that smells like fairy lights and nostalgia. Daniel was paying for the catering, the open bar, the live band. He'd even paid for a surprise slideshow of childhood photos of Margaret and Harold, which made my skin crawl because I knew exactly whose money was making their nostalgia possible. I wanted them to feel every stitch of that hypocrisy. First, I needed access. I couldn't just burst in and shout foreclosure notices at people. I had to make the embarrassment plain, inevitable, undeniable. So I started small and invisible. I called Susan at the bank again. Sweet, efficient Susan, who always remembered my granddaughter's birthday. "I need a favor," I told her. And she laughed as if I asked for a recipe. The favors aren't always about kindness. Susan liked gossip, and she liked being useful. A few signatures, a few formal requests, and she agreed to send me copies of the public notices they were required to publish when a property became at risk. They were dry legal pages, but to them, they would read like the end of a movie. Next, I worked on the guest list. I didn't need to be on it. I needed a seat where everyone would look and expect a programmed, polite face. So I posed as a vendor. I called a florist, a local man named Pete, who owed me a favor from when I helped his sister after a car accident. "I just need one arrangement," I said. "Something simple for the head table." Pete delivered a centerpiece with a small, almost invisible card tucked under the roses. It read, "Congratulations," from a neighbor. No one would notice that card until it mattered. Then I brought in Tom, a retired journalist who now wrote local obituaries and occasionally did background checks for people who wanted to know more about their in-laws. Tom loved a story. He dug up receipts, credit statements, and social media posts, proof of Lindsay's spending, Daniel's unpaid accounts. The fact that Daniel had wired money to cover a family emergency in Florida 6 months ago, it wasn't illegal. It was just truth with the right contexts. I rehearsed the timing in my head like chords in a song. The slideshow would play at dessert, right after the speeches. People relaxed with full stomachs, less guarded. The band would take a break. That was my opening. But plans have teeth, and life likes to shake them. The first close call came a week before the party, when Daniel showed up at my door with a takeout bag and that same look of practiced hurt. "Mom, please, they're my in-laws. They're good people. I know things got out of hand, but this has to stop." He looked desperate in a way that was almost believable. For a moment, I almost let everything go. I thought, what if I was being cruel? What if pride and heat and embarrassment were clouding me? But then he laughed when a college friend texted him a meme about moms who overreact, and he forwarded it to Lindsay with a string of heart emojis. That pushed me back into focus faster than any argument. The second close call was Pete the florist, getting nervous. "Carol, I don't want any trouble," he said over the phone. "What if they tie you to something?" I was careful and kind. "You're doing a job, Pete. I'm only asking for one card." He delivered like clockwork, and when he left, he touched my arm. He said, "You're a good woman. Don't let them make you forget that." I also had to be careful with Tom. He was eager. Too eager. He wanted to plaster their faces across his little newsletter, to write a hit piece that would satisfy his hunger for exposure. "No," I told him, "we don't burn bridges, Tom. We explain that the bridge was rotten." He grumbled, but he understood. The goal wasn't to ruin somebody's life with lies. It was to expose the choice they made the night they slapped me. That was an honest thing. On the night of the party, I wore a coat that made me look like one of the guests. Quiet, respectable. I carried nothing that would give me away. Daniel saw me when I walked up the path. His stomach dropped like a child caught stealing. He mouthed, "Don't," and then he forced a smile and turned away. Lindsay's smile was bright like a paper star. She glided past me with a drink in her hand, the picture of confidence. None of them knew the band would stop for exactly 9 minutes at the end of the night. I slipped in the back, somehow. Vendors are always late and always overlooked, and found my seat at the edge of the room. I watched faces, old college friends, cousins, neighbors who liked to laugh at other people's misfortunes quietly over wine. They applauded when the MC called for speeches. Margaret and Harold beamed like a pair of newly crowned monarchs. Daniel raised his glass and toasted to family. Lindsay laughed and kissed his cheek. The slideshow started. Charcoal photos of babies, a grainy clip of teenage prom night. I smiled because I loved those moments too once. Then, like an exhale, the screen shifted. Tom's voice, steady, unnerving, came over the speakers. In celebration of Margaret and Harold's 50 years together, we'd like to take a moment to reflect on what family really means. People leaned forward. The band's music faded. The slideshow didn't show pictures of the couple, it showed invoices. It showed bank notices. It showed a mortgage statement with Daniel's name and the foreclosure notice stamped in red. The room's temperature seemed to drop. Someone hissed. Lindsay's smile faltered. Daniel's hand went clammy around his glass. Those of you who've enjoyed this evening and think of yourselves as a family should know what family looks like when money runs out. It looks like choices. He let the word hang.
I felt the room tilt toward me like a tide. Faces turned, not with judgment directed at me, but at the people whose carelessness had become visible. Margaret's mouth formed a small O. Harold's jaw tightened. A cousin I barely knew looked at me with something that might have been sympathy. That was the first wave. The second came when a man, in the back, one of Lindsay's well-heeled friends, stood up and read an excerpt Tom had given him, an anonymous letter sent to several of the guests earlier that day. It was polite, clinical, and impossible to ignore. It contained copies of bank notices and a line I had written myself. When you call someone family, you don't make them your safety net without holding them in your hands with love and respect. The man's voice trembled, and for the first time in months, I felt no shame. People started whispering. A woman at the head table, Lindsay's cousin, Denise, rose and said something about how she had assumed Daniel's generosity was a sign of good character. "We didn't know," she said, and everyone looked down at their plates like they were suddenly eating a forbidden meal. Lindsay stood up, face white. "This is a private matter," she said sharply. "Who did this?" Her voice broke on the last word, and for a second she looked small, exposed. Daniel's head was bowed. He looked like a man who'd been pulled out of an easy dream and into a cold pool. I watched him, and for a second I wondered if he would finally defend me. He didn't. Instead, he reached for Lindsay's hand and squeezed, like that would fix it. What would you do if you were in my place? Would you gloat? Would you try to explain? I wanted none of that. I wanted them to see the truth and make decisions about what they were going to do with it. I wanted their discomfort to be a mirror. The night didn't explode into yelling. People are more self-protective than dramatic in public. Conversations splintered into corners. Some guests left quietly, clutching their coats. Others stayed, awkward and rigid. Margaret cried later, but not at me. She cried to a friend about shame and responsibilities and her son-in-law's naivete. When I left, the porch light caught my face and made me look older, harder. Daniel followed me to the car, voice low. "Mom, this is where you crossed a line." He sounded hollow, like he'd swallowed a stone. "Crossed a line?" I asked. "You watched your wife slap your mother, and you called it a prank?" "Who crossed the line, Daniel?" My voice was steady, but soft. I wanted him to hear different consonants this time. Accountability, consequence. He didn't answer. He probably didn't know how. That night, on my way home, the radio played an old song my husband used to hum. For the first time in months, grief washed over me, the real, human kind, not the vengeful sort. I sat in my car with my hands on the wheel and allowed myself to feel it. The plan had worked so far. They'd been exposed, but exposure alone wasn't satisfaction. Satisfaction would come later, when what I'd done brought about real change, not just embarrassment. That thought terrified and thrilled me.
They didn't take the embarrassment quietly. If anything, it inflamed them, turned shame into a sort of blind, furious energy. Within days, Lindsay had done what she does best, weaponized public perception. She posted a breathless Instagram story, soft focus photos of the party, a caption about toxic lies being spread by an angry neighbor, and a clip of Daniel smiling, looking scraped but fine. Comments flooded in, friends offering support, strangers defending the couple, relatives tagging each other in messages that read like battle lines. The narrative shifted for a while. Now I was the troublemaker. Daniel called me more than he had in the last 6 months. At first it was pleading. "Mom, please, take this down. Apologize, for both our sakes." I ignored the calls. Then the tone hardened. "Mom, this is serious. Lindsay's lawyer sent a letter. If you don't remove those documents and apologize publicly, we'll press charges for harassment." His voice sounded rehearsed. He sounded like a man reading someone else's words. A legal letter had arrived that afternoon, crisp and stamped.
The envelope smelled of new paper and thin power. I read it twice, then set it down and poured myself another cup of coffee. Threats are paper until they're not. I called Tom. He listened, then laughed. An odd, small sound of recognition. "They're scared," he said. "They don't like being reminded that their mansion was built on someone else's kindness." He offered to publish a longer piece. Careful, factual, with receipts attached. "Truth doesn't need embellishment," he said. Lindsay escalated in other ways. She called neighbors, planting seeds, that I was unstable, that I had always been a little dramatic. Someone leaked a doctored photo of me leaving Margaret and Harold's party, edited to make my expression look crazed. It made the rounds, and a few old friends turned their heads when I walked down the street. It stung. Public opinion is a fragile thing. Once it tilts, it picks up speed like a wheel on a decline. That was part 2 of her plan. Cut me off from the community so I'd be alone and easier to intimidate. But she forgot 2 things. 1, I'd spent decades building relationships, simple, solid ones that don't fall apart because some influencer liked a post. 2, I had proof. The bank notices, the canceled payments, the copies of messages where Daniel had thanked me for helping with a down payment. Truth is a stubborn thing. Meanwhile, money pressures tightened like a vice around Daniel and Lindsay. The foreclosure notices were no longer abstract. One crisp morning, a neighbor told me the moving company had been seen taking boxes from their attic. I watched from my porch as a U-Haul idled at their curb, while inside, Lindsay posted a reel about new starts and resilience. The reel had perfect lighting and the kind of smiling that hides a tightening jaw. They were staging optimism for an audience. Behind it, their options were dwindling. There were nights when Daniel would come by, not to plead, but to argue. "You humiliated us," he told me once, standing in my doorway, breath fogging in the winter air. "You don't get to decide my life, Mom. You don't get to ruin me for everyone to see." His face flamed with something that looked like anger and guilt braided together. "You could have talked to me. You could have asked. You could have defended me when she hit me. You could have stood up for your mother. That's what you could have done." My voice didn't break. I'd learned to hold the line without shouting. He pulled out the lawyer's letter like a talisman. "If you don't stop, we'll take this to court. We'll say you invaded our privacy, sent forged documents. You don't want to go down that road." He sounded like the man who had believed his in-laws' version of the world for too long, like the man still trying to belong. So I had to make choices. Court could be messy, expensive, public in different ways. If they accused me of forgery, I needed more than bank notices. I needed witnesses, confirmations, someone from inside to attest to the truth. That's when Tom introduced me to Linda, a woman who had once been a paralegal and now did pro bono work for people who'd been wronged. She read the files and didn't blink. She said, "We can defend this. We'll ask for discovery. Let them try to sue you for things you can prove true." Her calm steadied me. Having a quiet, competent ally is a delicate kind of armor. Lindsay, never patient, launched personal attacks. She called my church and spread rumors that I was bitter and dishonest, trying to turn my social circle against me. A woman I'd taught Sunday school with for 30 years avoided me in the grocery aisle, a look of fear rather than friendship in her eyes. It hurt in a way the slaps and the bank notices hadn't. I texted her once, asking if something was wrong between us. No reply. Who would side with me publicly? Who would testify that I had helped my son with money, that I had been the one to cover late fees, that friends had seen him hand over checks in gratitude? Surprisingly, people I'd expected to be quiet stepped forward. Pete the florist, who had once been too nervous to show his face near Lindsay's circle, messaged me, "If you need me, I'll say you were kind. This family doesn't own me." Susan at the bank, after a quiet conversation and a little nudge involving confidentiality law, agreed to provide the dates and amounts of the transfers she'd processed. Even some of Lindsay's neighbors, who'd been privately appalled by her behavior that Christmas, admitted they'd noticed the U-Haul, the unpaid contractors, the quiet panic that freckled her social media posts. But then, something unexpected landed on my kitchen table. A photo, grainy, taken from across a parking lot, of Daniel slipping an envelope across a counter to a woman at a cafe. The envelope wasn't big, but it was heavy with implication. I showed it to Tom. He frowned. He said, "That's the Florida transfer. Not a family emergency. A different kind of emergency." He dug deeper and found messages showing Daniel had been seeing someone for months, telling himself it was casual, that he'd separate the affair from family, that he'd sent money because she'd told him she was pregnant, that he'd lied to myself and told himself lies until the lies sounded like truth. "He never meant to hurt you," he said, raw and a little breathless. "I didn't mean to use your money like that." For the first time, I saw the boy who'd once needed me, the man he could be if he chose to stop lying. That flicker of humanity made the revenge feel thinner and heavier at the same time. You plan to wound because you're wounded, but what if the wound opens into something vulnerable and human? My plan had always been to teach them a lesson, not to watch a man I loved break under it. It complicated things. But I also knew that compassion is not the same as surrender. I could feel the eyes of the neighborhood on us, the whispering network of small towns and their judgments. I could feel the gust of social media and the cold paper of a legal claim. Choices had consequences, and consequences had a way of changing people. Lindsay, sensing blood, went on the offensive again, this time with petty cruelty. She posted a video of me leaving a market, edited to make me look clumsy and frail, and captioned it, "When you act like a victim, but you're the villain." The video went viral in her circle. Strangers messaged me, some with sympathy, most with anger. My phone buzzed with numbers I didn't recognize. I started guarding the front door. I thought about the apology Daniel had demanded. I thought about what truth deserved. One evening, after the shouting and the calls, I sat on my back steps and watched the sun fall away behind the trees. The house across the street had its porch light on. In that glow, I could see my face reflected in the window, older, uncompromising. I whispered to the empty air, "What would you do? Would you fold? Or would you finish what you started?" I wasn't sure which answer I wanted. The legal letters sat heavy in a drawer. Tom's articles had begun to circulate in quieter corners, shared by people who read beyond the headlines. Linda was drafting a response to the lawyer, firm, factual. And somewhere in the tangle of lies and truth, a new revelation was about to surface. An old recording, one that would either prove what really happened that Christmas or complicate everything I thought I knew about my son's silence. It arrived by accident, or fate, if you believe in that kind of poetry. Tom called me one afternoon, his voice crackling through the line with that sharp urgency I'd come to recognize. He said, "Evelyn, you might want to sit down. I think I found something." He sent me a link, private and unlisted. The thumbnail was a blur of twinkling lights, red sweaters, and laughter. When I pressed play, I realized what I was watching. It was the Christmas party, Lindsay's party, the one I'd been humiliated at. Someone had recorded it on their phone from across the room, and the audio, though slightly muffled, was unmistakable. I saw myself standing at the doorway, holding the small wrapped gift I'd brought for my son. I heard Lindsay's sharp, mocking voice cutting through the music. "Oh, look, everyone! She actually showed up! Guess she couldn't take a hint!" Then the laughter. Then the slap. The sound of it was louder than I remembered, raw and echoing, and I saw my own body jolt from the impact. But there was more. After I walked out, the camera stayed rolling. It caught Daniel looking around at the stunned guests, his face caught somewhere between guilt and horror. Then someone whispered, "Should we stop her?" And a man, Lindsay's uncle, I think, laughed and said, "Nah, she deserved it. Old Bat doesn't know when to quit." Then, faintly, Daniel's voice, "This wasn't part of it." Those 5 words changed everything. Tom traced the source to one of Lindsay's cousins who'd been at the party, a teenager who'd posted the video privately to a group chat, thinking it was funny. The cousin hadn't realized the full context, but now that the scandal had gone public, she wanted no part in it. Tom convinced her to give us permission to use it. Linda reviewed the footage 3 times and exhaled slowly. "This isn't just evidence," she said. "This is a confession on camera. The slap, the laughter, the intent, it's all here. And that line from your son, it shows he didn't approve. That changes the narrative entirely." The next step was careful. We didn't upload it to social media right away. We sent it first to Lindsay's lawyer, along with a brief, polite note. "We recommend you withdraw your client's threats of litigation immediately. Otherwise, this recording and accompanying documents will be submitted as evidence in a counterclaim for defamation, harassment, and intentional infliction of emotional distress." No threats, no drama, just quiet, lethal truth. 2 days later, silence. Then, a call from Daniel. His voice was quieter than I'd ever heard it. "Mom, they showed me the video." A pause, long and heavy. I didn't know someone filmed that part. I didn't know how bad it looked. I didn't think. "You didn't need to think," I said. "You needed to feel, to see me as more than a prop in her performance." He didn't argue. He just said, "I'm sorry."
But apologies are easy when the world is watching. Real change comes slower. So I told him the truth, that I wasn't trying to destroy him, only to make sure he understood the weight of what he'd let happen. "You were raised better than that, Daniel. I didn't raise you to watch a woman humiliate your mother for sport." He promised to fix it. I didn't believe him. Not yet. The next week, Lindy's lawyer sent a formal retraction letter. No apology, of course, but they withdrew their intent to sue, citing a misunderstanding and miscommunication between family members. Corporate speak for, "We're cornered and terrified." But the video had already spread, not from me, not from Tom, but from someone else who'd seen it in the group chat. Within days, it went viral under the caption, "When a family prank goes too far." People debated in comments, analyzing every frame, dissecting Lindsay's smirk and Daniel's hesitation. Sympathy began to tilt my way. Suddenly, the woman who'd been branded toxic was being called the mother with the slap heard round the neighborhood. The irony was, I hadn't even wanted revenge to go public, but sometimes justice has its own strange sense of timing. Lindsay's sponsorship deals started to crumble one by one. Brands quietly pulled their collaborations. Her family lifestyle image no longer fit the headlines that described her as the influencer who humiliated her mother-in-law on Christmas. Her PR team tried to spin it, something about forgiveness and moving forward. But the internet doesn't forget, and forgiveness doesn't trend. Daniel left her not long after that. He moved into a small apartment downtown.
started therapy, stopped pretending everything was perfect. He came by one afternoon with flowers, lilies, my favorite, and said, "I've been thinking about that night, about how I just stood there, about how you must have felt walking out." I didn't say much. I just looked at him until he looked down. Then I said, "You can't undo what happened, but you can decide who you want to be now." We sat in silence for a while, and for the first time in months, I didn't feel anger when I looked at him, just exhaustion, and maybe, somewhere underneath, a little relief. The house Lindsay once bragged about went up for sale a few weeks later. The for sale sign stood crooked in the snow, like an afterthought. Rumor had it the buyers were a retired couple from Texas, nice people who didn't care about gossip. I passed by once, saw movers carrying out the last boxes, and felt not triumphant exactly, just clean, like something had ended and something else had space to begin. Tom and Linda both came by to celebrate the quiet victory. "It's poetic," Tom said, sipping coffee. "You didn't just get revenge, you got clarity." Linda added, "Justice doesn't always come with applause. Sometimes it just looks like peace." That night, as I sat alone by the fireplace, the flicker of light reflecting off the window, I thought about everything that had happened, the slap, the humiliation, the laughter, the fight, and then the silence that followed. I thought about how revenge isn't always about making someone pay. It's about making sure you never have to beg for respect again. Would I do it all over again? Maybe. Maybe not. I'm not proud of every choice I made, but I'm proud I stood up for myself when no one else would, because sometimes the people who hurt you the most aren't strangers. They're the ones who share your last name. So if you're listening right now, if you've ever been made to feel small, silenced, or humiliated by someone who thought you'd just take it, remember this. You don't have to. You can stand up, speak truth, and let karma take its time. It might move slow, but it never forgets. Tell me in the comments, what would you have done in my place? Would you have walked away quietly or waited for the moment they finally tripped on their own lies? Please give this story a like, subscribe if you felt even a flicker of strength in it, and share it with someone who needs a reminder. Silence isn't kindness when it protects cruelty. Because in the end, revenge didn't destroy me, it rebuilt me, piece by piece, stronger than before. And for the first time in years, I finally slept in peace.